Star Wars is great for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons why it has been and continues to be successful is its cast of characters. There is at least one person among this host of individuals that someone of any walk of life could relate to. But you know something? That doesn't mean all of these characters are great. In fact, some of them are just straight up bantha poodoo. One in particular that I've never really cared for is Boba Fett. I don't know, maybe being born in the mid-90s put me at some kind of generational disadvantage. I mean, take Elliot from E.T. There is literally a scene in that movie of him talking up Star Wars action figures and how cool they are, Boba Fett being one of them.
This is Boba Fett.
Kids from the 1980s were really into this guy. To me though, Boba Fett has always felt like one of those characters who's cool only because I've been told that he is. I've never read any of the comics or the expanded universe books, so my only real exposure to him was his portrayal in the original trilogy, which,
Boba Fett? Where?
His appearances in Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars didn't really change my opinion on him that much, and I always preferred other heroes and villains over him in Star Wars Battlefront 2. It wasn't until Season 2 of The Mandalorian that I really came to enjoy this character, since at this point, I finally had the opportunity to see him proving his own worth. Rather than relying on the testimony of characters praising his off-screen exploits, Temuera Morrison's Boba Fett finally got his hands dirty and showed why he's a name to be both feared and respected across the galaxy. Due to his solid scenes towards the end of The Mandalorian's second season, a spin-off TV series specifically about Boba Fett was revealed in the post-credit scene of its finale. Fast forward to today, and this show has now completed its run. But to be quite honest with you, having seen the entirety of the Book of Boba Fett, as it came to be called, I kind of wish this show was never made to begin with. Or at least, it should have been made much differently. Before I continue on though, I know there's at least going to be someone out there who tries to throw out the whole "nobody hates Star Wars like Star Wars fans." On top of that, I know there are a lot of people out there who do in fact really like the Book of Boba Fett. I think that's great, for people should be allowed to enjoy things. Here's the caveat though. I don't like Star Wars, I love it. I always have. Just because I love the franchise doesn't mean that I cannot criticize it though. I offer criticism towards these movies, games, and shows because I want Star Wars to be the best that it possibly can be. No single executive at Lucasfilm is going to hear or let alone care about what I have to say, but if I encourage at least someone out there to think deeper about what Star Wars needs to do to succeed, then that's good enough for me. After all, as someone who genuinely loves this stuff, I have to be honest with myself that Star Wars content ranges from great to good, and then to not so good. The Book of Boba Fett unfortunately falls into that not so good category. Really quick, there are going to be very minor spoilers mentioned here. I'm not going to get too specific on plot points or anything like that, but if you don't want anything to be spoiled for you at all, well, consider this as your warning. Now that I've gotten all of that preamble out of the way, you may be wondering, why do I feel this way about the show? One would think that this would have turned out well, considering that practically the same crew and creative team behind The Mandalorian worked on this project. I mean, there certainly is a fair bit of quality stuff here, namely the visual effects and cinematography. Both of those things continue to be artistic highlights of live-action Star Wars television. But this show had some foundational problems at its core that add up to what is one of the strangest shows I've ever seen. And I don't mean strange in the sense that the content itself is weird. Rather, the structure of this series frankly just doesn't make much sense. I don't want this video to go on for too long, since I'll essentially be repeating a lot of points that other people on this platform have already pointed out. But the key mistake made with writing this show is that Favreau and company didn't seem to have one singular idea as to what this story would be about. It's not enough to simply ride off the premise of being a spin-off about a bounty hunter we hardly knew. Storytelling is more than just working off a concept. The audience should feel like they experienced a journey along with the characters. For the rest of this review, I'm going to explain my thoughts on this show by addressing how it does or doesn't fulfill the following points. 1. Why are we here? 2. What is the journey our main protagonist is going on? 3. What are we going to learn about Boba Fett that we didn't know before? And 4. What's at stake? First off, we already established that this show exists to build a sort of Mandalorian TV show universe, but also since no previously canonized Star Wars movie or show really dug deep into who he is. That's a reasonable enough starting point, I suppose. So now that we know why this exists, or at least in theory we do, what is that journey? As the post-credit scene of The Mandalorian Season 2's finale showed us, in addition to the first couple of episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, we learned that Boba Fett's goal is to assume control of the power vacuum left behind in Tatooine's crime world. As he says,
I intend to rule with respect.
I personally don't see any problem with him having this kind of goal. All we really knew about him from previous Star Wars media was that he was an unaltered clone of Jango Fett that eventually became a gun for hire, and also had some honor among other mercenaries once he was brought into The Mandalorian. However, the problem is how the Book of Boba Fett approaches bridging that gap. The first 4 episodes essentially boiled down to a game of teeter-totter, where one large portion of time is devoted to flashbacks explaining what happened after Boba Fett escaped the Sarlacc pit, and then the present timeline, where he's working to establish his status amongst other Tatooine crime lords. What's unfortunate about this choice is that neither of these two sides to the story really paint an accurate picture as to who Boba Fett is as a person, or rather, how he went from being a ruthless bounty hunter to forging a reputation as a respectable crime lord. That's important to make clear for someone like him, whose characterization previously amounted to little beyond being an action figure. A lot of time in these episodes is devoted to doing things that take away from really establishing a compelling reason for the audience to care. Episodes 1 through 4 feel like a protracted first act of a film, where it's less of a build-up to greater conflict, instead coming across as connecting the events of The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett together. Don't get me wrong though, it was fun to see more of the Tusken Raider customs, which included the making of Boba's gaffy stick, along with the scene in which Boba enacts his will as judge, jury, and executioner by raining fire upon the speederbike gang. Those moments were standout instances of show not tell in terms of communicating his attributes. Still, the show has this weird tendency of trying to introduce a lot of new character traits for Boba Fett, while making it tough to connect what little we knew about him from previous media to who he is now. His more quote-unquote heroic actions in The Mandalorian made sense since he was returning a favor to Din Djarin for giving his armor back. As a bounty hunter, he can understand the concept of an exchange. You give something, such as your combat services, in return for someone else having given something to you. With the Book of Boba Fett, I can understand why he would be motivated to exact revenge on those who wiped out the Tuskens who took him in as one of their own, but it hardly connects to his goal of replacing the Hutts as a crime boss. And even then, it's not like Boba Fett and Fennec Shand assume control over the entire planet. The present-day conflict is focused on a single city that feels so arbitrary when viewed from the big picture. What's really his goal then? Why is Boba Fett so obsessive over this random city in the barren wasteland of Tatooine when he can pick anywhere else in the galaxy to settle? Maybe I missed something, but this show just failed to convince me that Boba really cared that much about assuming protection over this one small city. At the time of me writing this section of the video script, I have seen the new Batman film starring Robert Pattinson. Like this show, that film has a dense plot that unfolds gradually over a long period of time. But a critical difference in why I was completely engrossed in one as opposed to the other is because The Batman completely nailed its opening. Within the first 15 minutes, the film communicated all of the following things very clearly: who the villain is and why he's a threat, who our hero is and why he wants to stop said threat, and the setting. Matt Reeves' film is not perfect, but given that it's a 3-hour crime thriller that takes its sweet time unraveling its plot, I was hooked due to how effective that opening was. In contrast, with the Book of Boba Fett, I distinctly remember that my parents asked for my opinion the day after it premiered, and I told them, it's okay so far, but I'll wait and see if it gets better. That impression I got from watching the premiere wasn't a good sign, and unfortunately, with each passing episode, I still had that same feeling. It wasn't until episode 4 that I began to really get invested, since we were actually getting to witness events that felt like they were contributing to the story at hand. But even then, these first 4 episodes do not benefit from a non-linear story structure at all. We should have known right from the beginning why it matters for Boba Fett to assume control over Jabba's territory, and then we also should have known the opposition to Boba pretty early on too. It also would have been great to get a better sense of how the Mos Espins felt about this, aside from the patrons of a cantina and the wannabe Power Rangers. But a lot of these things don't get established until episodes 3 and 4, and then the big legacy villain, Cad Bane, doesn't show up until the 6th episode, the one right before the finale. It also doesn't help that the Pike Syndicate, the villainous crime organization that is the show's true opposing force, is depicted as less competent than a squad of stormtroopers. It's hard to get scared by the Pikes when they could probably lose to a group of teenagers armed with airsoft guns. And on top of that, you know what happens once the story is finally starting to become interesting? That's right. The show completely forgets it's about Boba Fett for 2 whole episodes. It suddenly transitions into The Mandalorian Season 2.5. Don't get me wrong though, I completely loved what I saw for both of these episodes. The more cynical part of me faded away as I got this little update on what Din Djarin's been doing recently. I could dedicate an entire video towards my thoughts on all of the awesome stuff in these 2 episodes. But the problem is that I would have preferred to wait until Season 3 of The Mandalorian to see all of these things. It utterly throws off the momentum leading up to the finale of the Book of Boba Fett. With that though, I'm not against the idea of Mando joining up with Boba Fett for his fight against the Pikes. If they wanted to limit his role in the show to just being an extra set of hands in a gunfight, I would have been totally fine with that. It still would have been fan service, but it wouldn't have taken away from Boba's role in the story. Boba Fett essentially filled that role in Season 2 of The Mandalorian after all. I also loved the choice of having Cad Bane in the show. For anyone who has seen The Clone Wars will know that he and Boba have a history. The problem is that the show does a poor job organizing its disparate ideas into something cohesive and compelling. Telling the story as a miniseries was probably the first mistake. If they cut out episodes 5 and 6 entirely, the show would essentially be a 4-hour movie anyway. If John and Dave's goal was to have this be a side story that connects back to The Mandalorian, they could have just trimmed this down to a 2 or even 2.5 hour long Disney Plus original movie, and nobody would have complained. Start the story right after Season 2 of The Mandalorian, introduce Cad Bane much earlier, establish the conflict earlier on as well, reduce the amount of flashbacks, and then just spend the rest of the show building up tension to its action-packed climax. If the guys at Lucasfilm did this, I think the Book of Boba Fett could have turned out much better. But alas, what we're left with is a show that wasted too much of its time beating around the bush. By the time it was starting to get good, it was already too late. And the show also seemed disinterested in its main character for a long while, which is unfortunate since this was billed as the spotlight Boba Fett never got previously. I can only hope that once we get the Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Andor series, they won't repeat these same mistakes. If we're going to dedicate entire shows to fleshing out a key character, then that should be the focus. And that's it! Thank you for making this far into the video without sending me death threats for disliking something Star Wars related. If you liked what you saw and would be interested in seeing more of what I have to offer, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining the notification squadron so that you won't miss out on my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great one.